Oh, Hazel, we appreciate your go-to-itiveness. I will say that actually, and this is not just blowing smoke, but this actually is in fact one of the ways to start really becoming involved with the IETF is to actually jump in with both feet and take on a minor responsibility, no matter how small. And this, I would say, is not so small because it is actually something we need for the functioning of the working group. So, and one of the other things that both Glenn and I have failed to mention is that other people will be following the Cody and will be happy to jump in and make a quick correction if they see something, a missing name or a word that was gotten wrong. So it is not solely on your shoulders.
So Tim has said he can help out up to the top of the hour. So can we start out with maybe Hazel? Would you be willing to start out and with Tim and the two of you work together on this first round, and we'll see how it goes for the first hour?
That sounds like a good plan to me.
Well,
yes, exactly. They use the is that what it's called these days? Note-taking tool. Yep. And where it says it's going to open Cody MD, it's basically just Markdown, but you don't have to worry about formatting. Just type in the text and away you go.
And we've already pre-populated it with the whole agenda. So really, you just have to, in each section of the agenda, as we go down through it, if there's anything important that comes out of there, make note of it. You don't need to say, like in the chair section, that the chair has talked about getting a person, but you can note that Hazel and Tim have volunteered to help take notes. That would be a great start to those notes.
Right. You can mention how pathetic the chairs were in begging for such a note taker. I would have no objection to that being an official part of the record. It's accurate.
Ooh, Tim, that hurt.
Mm.
in the chat.
Wow.
All right,
It's
so
better than
let's.
again, isn't it? So there's that.
So and I don't think we need a Jabber scribe because we'll
No, I'll
follow
keep an eye
along.
on that.
Yeah. So, all right then. I think we can get started. I'm Glenn Dean. Hello. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Adaptive DNS Discovery Working Group (ADD). My other co-chair is David Lawrence, and our area director is Eric Vinke. David, would you like to say anything?
Yep.
Okay. So, of course, this is an official IETF meeting, and all activity done within this working group session is covered by the IETF NoteWell. If you're not familiar with it, please familiarize yourself with it. And here's the chairs. There's our esteemed area director. And here's our agenda for today. So we're in the first section here, the first 5 minutes. We've got our scribes, we've done NoteWell. This is the agenda, so we'll do a quick agenda bash. We're going to cover for a 10-minute presentation and 10 minutes of discussion. That's what those 10 and 10 mean. The first of our working group drafts, DDR, is going to be an update from the editors, followed by the analysis of the DNS forwarder as done by Barbara Stark and Chris Box. And you can read the rest of those agenda items. We'll go through them each as we work through the agenda. Is there any material that people want to strike off or add in? It's a pretty tight agenda, I'll warn people. Okay, hearing none, we'll accept the agenda. So let's get to it. Tommy Pauly, I think you're the one talking to the first agenda item, DDR. Is that correct?
That is correct. And if you could approve the sharing of slides.
Okay, so I just unshared my slide, so I think that gives you control, right?
Okay, should be going now.
Approve it, but it's good now. All right. And if you could maybe start one of the timers too, so we can tell how we're doing on time here. I want to make sure we're respecting the time.
Okay, I'll give it 10 minutes.
All right, perfect. I'm going to give a quick update on DDR, the Discovery of Designated Resolvers, not Dance Dance Revolution. And I'm doing this on behalf of our co-editors on this document. So where are we? Right before the cutoff, we published a draft 02 version of this document. Looking at GitHub and our conversations, there are 5 open issues at this point. They're generally pretty minor, and we're going to go over some of the discussion on those today. There is one open PR from Ben that there's going to be a talk on later. I'll touch briefly on that topic, but I think most of the discussion we can have later in the session. As a summary of some of the recent changes in the O2 version, there are a couple things that we modified based on the feedback from the working group, and I think these are all very, very good improvements. And so thank you to everyone who provided comments and issues on GitHub or the list. So we removed any previous mention of equivalence, and so now we're only talking about the fact that resolvers can be designated by other resolvers. We cleaned up some of the technical usage of the service binding record and how address hence should work to be more in line with the main document and its recommendations. We clarified the behavior of the DNS resolver.arpa lookup and how that should behave and not recurse and go up to the root. And we updated the examples and added examples so it's clearer exactly how these discovery queries are working. So hopefully, if you looked at the latest version of the document, it should be a lot clearer and easier to understand. So looking forward to some of the open issues here. One, I think that Daniel McGo had raised is around the use of resolver.arpa. Instead of, he was suggesting kind of using the reverse address form of an inaddr.arpa. The current behavior, I think the editors think is correct, but we'd love to hear more people's thoughts and comments on this. Our current rationale is to mimic something more like IPv4only.arpa, which is, again, a query that's really to the local resolver to figure out information about what it's doing. That one is used for NAT64 bindings, designated resolvers, but we believe that sets a precedent for using this type of query and understanding that it is not meant to go up to the root. And we believe this is also kind of the right thing to do because it is a address agnostic query. It's just saying, hey, resolver, I don't care how I'm accessing your thinking of you. Do you have a designated resolver that you're pointing to? Anyway, so I can move on from this, but if people do have thoughts, you could join the queue now or at the end or comment on the GitHub. Oh, Alex.
I'm in favor of the change. So I think that using any inner ARPA space would be very confusing because people would expect that that would be in the public DNS. And I think it's actually dangerous to have that in the public DNS, and people would start putting it there. Yeah.
So to be clear, the resolver.arpa is preferred to anything with inaddr. That's what you're saying.
Right, exactly. Please use resolver.arpa.
Yeah, which is what we currently have.
Otherwise, it would leak out to the public DNS. Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. Daniel, since this is your issue, I'd love to hear your comments.
Now you hear me, I guess.
Now I can.
Okay, so the rationale for changing it is more to understand who we are actually asking, who we are communicating with. So this is why I think that a generic term is not the preferred way to do. And the other one is that it clearly breaks DNSSEC because we cannot have DNSSEC on with a generic term, so that has a local specification. So
sure, I think the intention is that this would not be a DNSSEC signed record because that wouldn't make sense. Like, I guess I would like to understand, why in your mind would this be any different from IPv4only.arpa?
So I don't know IPv4 only.arpa. but so the one I think we have this home dot no, we have a not a homenet.arpa but something similar, and it's it comes with some issues. At least the thing is that the thing that it is breaking the security model of DNS seems to me a sufficiently large problem. And the other one is also that you don't really know who is answering to you. Sending like a bottle to the ocean.
Yep.
That's my other point. But the question I had to the previous person that was coming was what kind of harm do we expect if it's in the public DNS? I don't understand what would be the problem of having this in the public DNS.
Okay. So I appreciate Tommy just calling people into the queue for a moment, but let's still handle the queue, and we can come back to that then, address that point.
Cool.
So.
All right.
Okay.
Ben,
should I
please.
remove myself from the queue or?
I already took you out, but if you're done
okay.
with your overall point, it Ben's up. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Ben Schwartz, Google. Yeah, I support resolver.arpa as the name here. I want to point out that DDR does not break the use of DNSSEC for identification and validation of these records. What DDR says is if you want to use DNSSEC, then DNSSEC validates data associated with a DNS name. So your resolver has to be identified by a DNS name. If your resolver is identified by an IP address in DDR, that's not a domain name, and so DNSSEC is not applied.
Thank you. Rolf?
Yeah, pretty much also for resolver.arpa, because also the use case within the home network would not work with the reverse anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
All right,
Alexander, to respond to the question from before, I think that I can see two risks. The one is that an unsuspecting DNS administrator could put it deliberately in the public DNS because they don't understand between the fact that the domain should resolve only for the local resolver and the public reverse zone of their network, in a sense. And the other thing is, I think that people would desperately start trying to get delegations for private IP addresses just to put those records in. Those are the two things that come to my mind immediately. Yeah. So resolver.arpa clearly makes it clear that it doesn't belong in the public DNS because the zone is not in the public DNS. Yeah. That's my point.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's
All right.
not overlapping something else.
Yeah, we have pretty clear direction in the group. And I'd like to move on from this issue. Mark, can it be very quick?
I'll comment real quick.
I can't hear you, Mark. If you could, maybe just drop your comment into the chat.
The integrated, the RFC 1980 in reverse space is implicitly delegated to everybody.
So, hey, Tommy, I'd like to jump in here as chair and point out this is captured inside GitHub as a resolver, or issue number 21 in the Git. So if you want to go in and make some additional comments, either on list or directly into the GitHub repository, they'll get captured as well and carried forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll put a summary of this conversation into that issue as well.
Yeah, and also that was the 10-minute mark. So
Yes.
It's great to have the discussion while it's going on, while it's up in front of us, but 10 minutes.
So I've just started a second timer. This is our sort of Q&A timer. So when we're up, this is the end of the this session.
Cool.
For this document, I mean.
Perfect. Well, there's essentially only one other issue I was going to highlight. So let's move on to that. And so I have a couple more slides on this just to talk about it. So we have an issue here, and it's really a couple issues in a family talking about, what is authenticated versus opportunistic. And so some things we just wanted to clarify from the editors. So authenticated discovery, as defined in the document, is saying that this redirection, this designation of another resolver is kind of a trusted redirection. And that trust is based on either matching a known name that you have for the resolver or a pre-known IP address. And that's being validated in the certificate. And the use case here, just to clarify for people, again, is maybe you have an IP address such as Quad 1 or Quad 8. That's a public IP address that you know about, and you want to be able to find other things that this resolver may support. So, for example, you may have, you may know Quad 1 because someone typed in Quad 1 to a configuration on a device, but this is a server that's actually accessible from many different addresses. You can access it over v6. You can have a hostname validation for it, and this allows us to bootstrap into that world. So that's kind of the reason for having authentication that allows you to go beyond just sticking to a private address. The opportunistic case is, on the other hand, something where you're only currently allowed to stick to the same IP address because we're not able to validate anything else about it in the cert because it's probably a private IP address space. And so again, this is meant to address the cases where someone is running encrypted DNS on the same private address resolver that they already had. And this is useful as a mechanism to allow encrypted DNS to prevent DNS observation when you're on a network and you're trying to prevent an attacker snooping on your network when you're on a public Wi-Fi or someone on the home network. There was a list discussion about, is this valuable? I believe, given this use case, we believe it is still a valuable thing to have. And Ben, do you want to comment?
Hi. I just want to say we're going to have a very detailed discussion of this at the end, so I'd prefer not to have the comments about this at this time.
Okay. So I mean, yeah, this is commenting on kind of what the draft currently gives value of and just trying to clarify what these two different modes are. And then just kind of one comment I'll make, and this, again, this will get into the discussion that we'll have at the very end of the agenda, but I wanted to give the perspective that the current document has on it. So for the case where you have a complete mismatch between your provisioned IP address, which may be your private local network address, and what the designated resolver is, that is currently disallowed in the document. So that's the case where I have the device only knows about a private IP address, but really that's forwarding on to some ISP resolver that has an encrypted DNS, but there's no way to prove that designation or that delegation there. So based on the definitions we already have, authenticating this case is out of scope. Like, we can't prove that these are the same thing. But one thing I would point out for people, and again, we can talk about this more at the end of the agenda, is that the unauthenticated hint of the fact that we do have a SVCB record that could come from that upstream resolver if the local CPE is not blocking it, does exist. So the PR11 that we'll discuss later is an attempt to try to solve for this problem with a security model that is just trying to retry a lot and tries to get you into an authenticated world. And I would suggest that, kind of given the way that DDR currently is thinking of things, another approach here is to soften the language of DDR to say it's not that you can't use this hint, but the hint cannot really be used to automatically assume that there is an authenticated way to use this. That doesn't mean that there can't be a system policy or user approval way to allow this. There are many different use cases here. For example, my CPE resolver may be something that I don't want to circumvent, because maybe it's running a pie hole and it's doing ad blocking or other, fancy things. Automatically circumventing that, I believe, would be incorrect, because those are not designated, those are not equivalent. However, letting a user choose, saying like, hey, we see that your DNS is behind something that offers encrypted DNS on Comcast. Do you want to use that? And then the user can make a choice, or something else can make a more informed choice about, is it appropriate to skip the actual CPE resolver, which may be just a blind forwarder, but it may be running something that the user really wants, like a pie hole. Anyway, that's kind of our editor's thoughts on these issues, and we have a couple minutes left. I see Ecker in the queue.
Tommy, so like what you propose here sounds terrifying. Hey user, garble, 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 DNS, tech. Would you like the tech? I mean, like, I just cannot see how any user could possibly assimilate that information. So,
I mean, again, like, this could be up to system policy. For example, in Firefox, like, you guys have a list of trusted, encrypted resolvers. So you could say, hey, this is one of the ones we know about. We've approved this one. Do you want to use it? It doesn't necessarily have to be something.
I mean, sure, but I mean, to be clear, we intend to use DDR as it presently exists for this purpose, right? So I think exactly. I guess, well, maybe I'm not following, but I think,
I guess, so what I'm saying is that in the cases where DDR cannot automatically validate that these are truly the same entity that we should be jumping directly to encrypted, the system still has the hint of what the designated resolver could be, and you can choose to use it how you want to for your operating system, browser, IoT device, but it is not something that is solvable at a protocol level.
Sure, but I guess I'm just saying, like, fair enough. I'm just saying, I agree with that part. I'm just saying, like, that like, if we were to do this, it would most likely be, we would just look at the domain name that you were claiming and ignore the IP addresses entirely, right? Because we already know exactly where we want to go. We don't need this information. We don't need any information, right? So I guess, like, so I mean, if that's what you have in mind, sure. But I guess I'm just saying, like, what we have in mind is like probably stuffing, I haven't thought it through too much, but just stuffing, whatever's convenient in these records in a way that kind of like works out, right?
If I can jump in here, guys, this is a good discussion, but I'll point out that it's sort of like DDR is, as we are chartered, is a discovery mechanism. It's a means to discover. It's not the whole solution. And while Ecker, you have good points, I think we're drifting off a little bit into the decision and the usability framework portions that would make use of this, yes, down the road, but this is technical GORP because it is low-level technical GORP that other things will then tap into and build on top of. Does that make sense?
That's exactly right.
It's also a discussion that we have spot on the agenda later for.
Yeah, right. So essentially, just Glenn, to your point, I think what I'm trying to say for the purpose of DDR, given this is in the DDR section, is that I believe that the DDR, like you say, is a mechanism, and that at some point the mechanism kind of runs out of what it can tell you, and it says, here's what I can do certain things, but all of the discussion about how we end up using these hints in this local CPE to ISP resolver, I think that we believe may be out of scope of this particular mechanism and may end up being, maybe you have other heuristics, or maybe you just have system policy like what Ecker was talking about. But those are not things that DDR needs to worry about as its own solution.
And I will add that's even out of scope to our current charter. So
yes, exactly. So I want to say, like,
right.
Let's leave.
So I largely agree with that, but I guess what I'm saying is, what I do not want us to do is go down the road of designing mechanism which is not of conceivable use to anybody. And so, like, the way Tommy described it seems useful, but like I can imagine things we could say which nobody would conceivably actually consume, and we should not say those things. So that's right. The interface between the decision matrix and the signaling is that someone at least plausibly want to consume this information.
Yeah, exactly. And so just to wrap up, I believe what we are saying is that currently DDR gives you a hint, and it can give you an authenticated version, a way to learn about the private address version, and then a hint that can't tell you anything more, but you can make a decision with. We think all three of these use cases are valid and useful to different people, but we think that's where the mechanism in DDR ends. And
Okay.
it is providing this and handing off the work to other solutions. Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Tommy.
thank you,
Eric,
Tommy. Yeah, we
I
need to
see-
get back on. We need to get back on track.
Well, Eric reached. Okay.
Did he rejoin?
He had. If you have a quick comment, go ahead and make it there, Eric. Before we move on to the next.
Modals are kind of confusing.
I didn't quite catch
Okay.
that. I'm not sure whether our note takers caught that.
The interface is confusing. I did not have a comment.
Okay.
Okay.
So that brings us to our next item. So the next item on the agenda, flipping back to that. Oh, it goes back to the first slide. That's annoying. Not where we were at. The next item on the agenda is Barbara Stark is going to talk about the analysis of a DNS forwarder scenario relative to DDR and DNR. And this we've allotted 10 minutes for Barbara to sort of pitch it out and explain their thinking. And then an extended 20 minutes of discussion. So Barbara, I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes. The first 10 are yours to do as you like with, and then we're going to run out to have a good chat.
Okay, great.
And I'll actually like to, I mean, Tommy was quite happy to take discussion during. Would you like to just get through your presentation and then all comments to the end, or?
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
If the first people are disruptive, then I'll get to the end.
Okay, I understand. We'll keep an eye on that.
Okay, you have control, Barbara.
Okay. Let's see. I haven't done this before.
So if you look under your name up on the left, there should be like a shared slides up where you can like turn your video on and off. There is a share preloaded slides button. If you click on that, you'll find that your presentation is preloaded, and just click on it and it will show.
Okay, so I had the slides request, but that didn't seem to do anything. I didn't see any other pre-ordered slides. I don't want to take too long.
Something though.
Chairs have to approve the slide request.
Oh, there it comes. Huh. Okay. I am not seeing my slides. Are other people seeing my slides?
You know, Barbara, what I'll do is I'll pull them up, and then you can just tell me when you want to go to the next one.
Fair enough. That works. Sorry for the problems. Okay, so this was just an analysis of sort of the DNS forwarder scenario where you've got this common scenario with the residential gateway, CPE, some people like to call it CE router, that has a DNS proxy, DNS forwarder type functionality in it. And just kind of seeing, you know, given the current state of DDR and DNR, how does this scenario play out? This was a use case specifically listed in the requirements. It has been specifically mentioned often in discussion in and around ADD and the forming of ADD. So it's clearly one that is used by many ISPs around the world, including my employer. So this particular draft is only trying to analyze this specific use case, you know, not enterprise use cases, not the case, you know, of the coffee shop owner, other cases like this. This is specifically, you know, this residential end user use case and what would they experience under the current state of where these drafts are. In this case, of course, the CE router does offer itself as the DO53 resolver using DHCP, v4, v6, RDNSS. Any of those are possible. So yeah, I'm just trying to analyze it. Let's move on if we could. So you know, why do operators put this proxy in this device? There are a variety of reasons. Local name resolution. You know, oftentimes these devices have their own little domain that and they can tell people, if you ever need to access your router, just type in this domain name and there you are. And this especially, of course, gets useful with IPv6. We know domain names, we don't want people typing in IPv6 addresses. So having local name resolution as we slowly move towards v6 only, perhaps in some few decades in the future, really does become important. And so, local name resolution at some point is something that has to get solved. Captive portals, we had some discussion around captive portals. I'll just mention some ways captive portals are used are to provide initial configuration. When you first plug this device into a network, the network does not necessarily trust it. So it needs to go through some level of user interaction. So it brings the user to a captive portal where the user can perhaps provide some information provided by the ISP that says this device is indeed associated with this user and this user's connection, and then it's given full access to the network. Some other uses I've seen of captive portal are when the user plugs a secondary router in because they want that other router to actually be the main router for their home network. And the ISP router simply becomes the mechanism that knows how to connect to the ISP network. Sometimes you can have a functionality that the ISP router can pop up and say, oh, I see you've put in another router. Would you like me to eliminate my NAT so that that router then gets the public IP address? And you can have this as a way to eliminate the double NAT. These are just some uses of captive portal. Now, I don't know if the current discovery mechanisms or would break the captive portal usage, but it's certainly something to consider. There is the filtering, and there is caching. As we know, these devices do cache to improve DNS performance, and in some cases that can be useful. If we could move on. So, I kind of went through a few scenarios. There are some assumptions common to all the scenarios. An assumption that maybe if we are successful, that common operating systems would support both DNR and DDR, and that some applications might choose to support DDR. Now, one thing we know pretty much for certain is that there's no certificate authority in the world that is going to sign a certificate with a private IP address in the SAN field. So, we know that certificate authorities cannot be used to provide a chain of trust for any certificate that might be provided by the residential gateway CE router device. Okay, so moving right along, the first scenario looked at was the router is not updated at all. We know this is going to be a very common scenario because we know how, either routers don't get updated or perhaps the ability to support anything around DOE or DDR, or DNR, those sorts of things may not be a priority. It's not necessarily a security flaw. Many routers vendors, these are oftentimes not the very high-end routers, and so oftentimes the companies that offer them really are very careful around their development resources and what features they put in. So we need to assume that there are going to be many that are not updated or oftentimes cannot be updated. So in this case, the operating system or the app simply will not discover a local encrypted resolver. If they may use some non-standard mechanism like we see currently with a number of browsers where they maintain lists and they simply default maybe to their preferred DOE provider, things like that. but from a DNR DDR perspective, we can't expect anything happening around that local with the CE router. So basically, in their current form, it's pretty clear that DDR and DNR do not satisfy the requirement that is in the requirements draft that should not require any changes to DNS forwarders. And you know, that is what it is. I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm simply saying it is, and we should acknowledge that it is, hopefully. And also, you know, non-upgraded legacy routers are also not going to satisfy the requirement that a DNS forwarder should not forward queries for resolver.arpa upstream. That too is what it is. You can't change them. That's by definition. And you know, the testing we've done suggests they will be forwarding the resolver.arpa or whatever this URL is upstream if they get the request. So hopefully these are not controversial notes or assumptions or result suggestions. Oh, look, Tommy wants to say something. Tommy?
Hello. Yeah, just I was wanting to comment on some of the stuff that was going on in the chat as just clarifications to this. So first, for that second part about the forwarding, you're correct that the DDR says that you shouldn't forward these upstream. However, it does explain that for like the blind forwarder case, which is very common on the router, that it may do that when it essentially knows that it's not kind of the end resolver that is going to be offering encrypted DNS. So I think that can certainly be wordsmithed, but I believe the intent is, you know, when you just have a forwarder on your local router, it does pass that upstream and you do end up getting the hint.
Right,
from-
and this is scenario one. The CE router is not updated, and no
So I-
CE router today.
Right, and that's good. Like that's exactly what we want to have happen, because in this case, the client device will still get the hint of what encrypted resolver it can use. So yeah, I think, you know, wordsmithing is fine, but I think it actually is closer to what you want than this slide would make it look like.
Yeah, and I was just kind of trying to compare against some of the requirements that are present in various places, and just an acknowledgement of, you know, we need to acknowledge that these not updated routers are simply going to forward these requests. So moving along, I think scenario 2, this is updated to provide DNR. So this is, you know, in the DHCP replies. And you could also, you know, decide to do something about resolver.arpa locally or not, but not trying to offer DOE natively within the router. So in this case, you know, if you get the DOE, the encrypted resolver information by the DHCP, you know, some operating systems might use it if they feel like it, but then again, they might not. Applications that try the resolver.arpa would not use the encrypted resolver. And just in looking at some of the reasons, you know, why we have this forwarder proxy here that in the first place, our local name resolution is now broken. We, you know, legacy captive portal is something we're still exploring and going to be doing some testing on. And actually the initial testing suggests it may be okay, but that also may depend on the implementation. You know, part of the reason for that is, you know, that maybe the first DNS query that gets launched is to resolve the domain of the DOE server, in which case the captive portal may be hit. And of course, this is the legacy captive portal type stuff and not the new captive portal, because of course these routers are slow to take on new features. Filtering in the CE router is certainly broken. Filtering deployed in the core network resolver does continue to operate. There is no local caching for any sort of efficiency or to lower latency around DNS queries. So those are simply, they are what they are. And if we move on.
Barbara, can you take a quick comment from Ben?
Oh, yeah, sure. Hi, Ben.
Hi. So I find that scenario 2 confusing because the resolver is deliberately breaking itself. That is, advertising DNR is a statement to the network of the form, I would suggest that you use this resolver instead. And that is that statement is made by the CPE device. So if the device is telling the network, don't use me, then it, of course, is no surprise that services it provides are no longer present in the DNS service that it has pointed to. But that is its own decision, and it, none of this has, it can also, as I think you're about to note, it can point DNR to itself, in which case there's no problem. So anyway, I think this is, you're describing essentially a buggy deployment. I think, the answer is don't do that.
I would agree. But part of the usefulness of analyses like this is to be able to come to a conclusion like that, using paper rather than code, to come to the conclusion of, this probably is not a good idea. So I agree, but yeah, I wanted to step through it, and I'm glad we agree on that. And so the last scenario was to look at, if we update the CE router with, so if we move on to scenario 3, yeah, I think I went through all that. This would be the fully upgraded CE router. In this case, the operating systems and the applications that feel like supporting discovery will support it, and those that don't won't. That is what it is. We are going to see inconsistent behavior. And honestly, in talking with my friends who do router development, this isn't really a very likely thing to happen in the context of such uncertainty. So while this could certainly provide, it is a possibility, it's actually appearing to be also an unlikely possibility. But let's also go to the next slide, and yeah, which is the question of, is the analysis correct? So, what I'm seeing is that the most likely scenarios of what we're going to see from behaviors in CE routers are that either the proxy is on or the proxy is off. If we assume that even advertising the DHCP address of the upstream doesn't make sense, then those really are the options. And if those are the options, and we were serious about wanting to support this use case and maybe not breaking some things that users can currently do in the process, what is the path that we should take? And so I think the last slide is about, what do you think? Do we take no action? Do we make any changes to DDR, DNR? Do we create implementation best practices? Which, Glenn has said is out of scope, but, recharters can happen. And maybe it would be useful for us to see if we could consider some best practices, with, just like we can't necessarily expect applications or operating systems to do DDR or DNR. We couldn't necessarily expect best practices, but at least we could express them.
Barbara, one clarification. So for the documents that are being developed, DDR and DNR and anything that comes after them, it is appropriate and in scope to provide guidance in those documents to say, look, do not do these things with these protocols we've developed, right? Out of scope, of course, is the UI and decision making, all that other kind of stuff, which is the client side functionality. That's out of scope, but guidance on avoiding stupid stuff, totally in scope.
I'll so I think that's in that case, if we are not allowed to ever consider recommending that users be given options, which I heard you say is out of scope, then I think this is dead in the water. I don't think it's really possible to say, that users have control, but we're not going to allow users to have control. We're doing this for the sake of users, but we're not going to give users any control over it. We're not even going to recommend that users have control over it. I think that's problematic, and I would actually urge reconsideration of that. But let Tommy Jensen.
Well, hang on. Let me clarify that again. So what we are not chartered to do was to work on the UI or the browser or the logic portion of this discovery decision making. We are chartered to convey the information and develop the means to do that. So as I look through the presentation you just did, several things are touched on router implementations and architectural decisions of how you would do things in CPU devices. That would be in scope to talk about because it's usage of the transports that we're defining here, while staying away from the UI portions and the client-side decision making. Does that make sense?
Sure, but it also says yes, those are the rules that were decided, and what I'm saying is that is going to result in we're giving up on supporting this use case. We're simply saying this use case is not supported. It's going to be broken because we refuse to even consider making recommendations around how users are treated. Or, yeah, anyway.
Okay, we have a
Or
growing queue. So if we could
yeah, Tommy
jump into that.
Jensen.
Tommy Jensen, please.
Microsoft. Two questions. First, though, to address what was just being discussed. I don't think that saying that we can't standardize protocol support for a scenario is the same as saying we're going to abandon it. Speaking at least for my area, I can say that they're different. From the discussion in the first set of slides, I'd actually point out what was happening there at the end, the kerfuffle around client policy discussion. As Tommy points out, DDR stops at saying, oh, we cannot validate this record, this hint, but it's still there. And so just because DDR doesn't tell you you have to use it doesn't mean a client can't decide to use it under certain circumstances. It's just, as a working group, we've decided that we can't go standardizing that behavior because every client's going to want to make different decisions. And I'll leave that at that in terms of my commentary there. My other question was just a question. It seems to me that most of the things discussed here are time-bound, meaning that eventually DDR, DNR, CAPORT work would address the concerns. Am I missing something where there's some subset that those solutions will never work?
Well, so for me, one thing that I think it could be, the DNS caching hit could probably be accepted as, let's just take, the latency isn't that bad and things are doing fetches and things like that. I think the captive portal is solvable. I think it really comes to sort of the local domain names, in which case you really need some sort of split horizon, because I don't think the CE router can reasonably be expected to support DOE. And I think you need some sort of split horizon allowance that says, that allows the user to say, I've got local domains, and this is where, I want you, I don't want the DOE server in the network used for local domains. And so maybe if we allow for some sort of split horizon in the context of a home network and not just enterprise, that, might be something to consider, and that would,
Great, thank you. Eric, please.
thing that might be worth calling out for some of these is what is and isn't possible on the boundaries of these, like especially on the parental controls topic, which is a very kind of important and hot button topic here. Being able, clarifying that there are some types of parental controls that are possible. For example, you can with DNR and DDR, you could have a two different resolver IPs you could hand out, one of which had parental controls enabled and the other that doesn't have parental controls enabled. Or you could have if you're using DOE, you could have a DOE URI that embeds some of the policy information into that. So you could do, so there's some degree of parental controls that are possible. It just becomes harder and doesn't necessarily make it as easy to do the level of fine-grained parental controls as you can do on the router itself.
And of course, in IPv4 parental controls, if you do it at the server, you get it as at the household, and it can no longer be specified at the device level. It might be curious if with IPv6 something might be done, but maybe not. So yeah, parental controls is another issue, and I know it's a bit more of a concern to my co-author across the pond.
There are already a number of home routers that do Mac-based parental controls. So they'll decide which policy to give out to how to apply policy based upon the MAC address of the individual client within the house and let users configure that. And that sort of thing may be possible here. You just need to go and point, instead of implementing it there, you need to put it up a level and give the user a different IP address of a different resolver that does or doesn't do parental controls.
Yeah, I was talking about the complexity of trying to do parental controls in the server, in the network, in the big recursive resolver in the network. That it's not seeing the MAC addresses, things like that. I guess Eric.
Tommy Pauly.
Oh, Tommy. Oh, sorry, I scrolled. My bad.
Yeah, no worries. So first, I do want to reiterate for the group that there are a number of cases that do work well for both DDR and DNR. Mobile network scenarios, they're going to do the right thing. A lot of home Wi-Fi networks, like I'm on Comcast here, I get Quad 75. That's going to work just fine with DDR or DNR as they are. But I think for the case you're bringing up here, I definitely don't think we want to accept the breakage or give up on them. And I don't think people are suggesting that. But the problem with automatically trying to encrypt things for these scenarios is exactly what you were bringing up on slide 2. I think those are, or the scenario 2. Skipping the local filtering rules, skipping local name resolution. These are more complex problems, and these two things, to use our earlier terminology, they're not equivalent. They're not designating each other. It's a more complex scenario, and I think the mechanisms again that we have in DDR are necessary to allow clients to solve this, but they are not sufficient on their own for this particular scenario. And I think what you were mentioning about user control, I think that's exactly what we need for this scenario, because a device cannot make the decision for someone about whether or not they want to use their filtering on their local CE. And long term, I think this will all work out and shake out well, but we're going to need kind of per client implementation policy and user experience solutions here that I think are going to go beyond what we can do in this working group.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe we could talk about some possible local configuration settings without discussing any sort of UI that would help to set the local configuration, because we have often been able to have configuration around protocols.
Thank you. Ecker?
So it seems to me that this presentation implicitly asks something impossible, which is, at least in the context of what we're trying to do with DDR. Because the point of DDR is to allow you to upgrade to encrypted connection, regardless of the state of the local router and without touching the local router. And what you're asking for is to not upgrade to an encrypted connection without touching the local router. And the problem is those things look identical to the client. And so, now there are things one can imagine doing. So for instance, as Ben was mentioning, Firefox attempts to detect when it thinks the local router is filtering, and if it does, it turns off though. And contrary-wise, if it can't resolve something, it falls back, which sort of half works with these local name things. But like as a practical matter, like if you're not willing to touch the local router in either case, you will not be able to distinguish these cases generically unless there's some uniform thing. So, I mean, it seems to me that like is the second requirement that's the one that's broken, because you should be favoring encryption. And if the local router wishes to stay in the game, it should have to take some positive action. Now we could discuss what positive actions will be very easy, such as updating your block list to block resolver.arpa. But I mean, the premise of this group, I think, is we should be biasing towards more encryption. And so having a situation in which a local router has to be upgraded to allow encryption seems like antithetical to that. So so I think like obviously, as I said, I don't think it's ideal to break those use cases, and we may sometimes have not to. But like we know we don't get it right all the time, and and we expect that the local routers have to make some change occasionally.
Yeah, I'm just kind of concerned. After the people kind of were hoping HomeNet would be able to cause the local routers to do some changes as well. But I'm a bit of a realist since I've kind of worked with them for about 20 years. And, my sense of things is if local routers do change, it's going to be a long, long time. And like I said, part of it was just, I really think we should acknowledge our expectations around this particular use case and, not pretend otherwise.
Sure. Well, I don't think I'm pretending otherwise. I'm just saying that I don't see how to solve the problem.
Okay.
Hey there, Glenn here, jumping in. So we are out of time for this particular topic. If there's
Glenn, I will note that our AD was the next one in the queue, and I don't know if he's jumping in with his hat or not.
Pulling rank. Eric?
Yeah. And Glenn, it will be very short anyway. It's simply to second what you said 5-10 minutes ago. I think it's within the charter, basically, to put usability statement or even some recommendation on the protocol, but of course not about deciding a policy whether you need to do this and this in this case, right? So that's all I had to say. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Eric.
Andrew, make a quick judgment. Do you have 15 seconds for your comment, or can you maybe hold it for later? Okay.
I can be real quick. Firstly, I want to say thank you to Barbara and Chris for writing this up. I think it's really important that we document the real world and deal with that, not what we'd like the world to be. And I think it's imperative we find solutions for 1 and 3, but particularly 1 when we acknowledge that the sort of shelf life for routers or routers, if you prefer, is potentially 10 years plus for many people. So we can't just wish this away by saying they need to upgrade them, because that isn't going to happen for the vast majority of users, irrespective of what we might prefer.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And
thank
you,
you, Barbara. Great minds. Okay, so our next topic is going to be, let me take this off and slip back to our agenda. It's going to be presented by Dan Wing, and I see Dan's queued up. It's going to be, let's see, this is item number 3, which is DHCP and router advertisement options for discovery of network designated resolvers, or as we like to call it around here, DNR. It's a heck of a mouthful. Dan, do you want to drive, or do you want me to drive, or what would you like to do?
It'd be easier if you drove, because I haven't done this Michu driving thing. So
happy to do
slide.
that.
This is only 2.
Yeah, this is a short one. So we have I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Yeah. So we have 5 for prez and 5 for questions.
Won't even need that. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of our changes from previous IETF. Sorry, the title's wrong. So from there, we changed how we're doing the SVCBs and got review from DHC working group on the approach that we're using. Some more text on design rationale, and incorporated Michael's suggestion in section 3. Then in the version 2, we've split off the deployment considerations into a separate document, which will be the next to next presentation that I do here, and clarified the V4, V6 hints for the FCC params. And we currently have no pending comments against 02. So next slide. As far as the authors are concerned, we are ready for a working group last call. But let's see if there's anyone with comment.
Taylor,
David, did you guys want to manage the queue, or how do you want to do that?
It's been working fine when the queue has not been crazy. For Ben, you can go ahead, please. And I was talking into a muted microphone, so that's why it was a little delayed.
I think this draft is good. I think it's, in the sense it's ready for last call, but I also kind of worry that if we move forward with it now, we preempt some important discussions, because it should remain in line with DDR. And
Okay.
so moving this forward now, before we've really pinned down some of the details of DDR, worries me. For example, we need to be really clear on what the authentication rules are, what names you have to have in your certificate when you use the different modes. And I think that's still a topic of debate. We should try to reach similar or matching solutions for DNR and DDR.
Okay, that's fair. Cool, thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Chris Fox, please.
Hello. So I agree with Ben that it's a little early to do working group last call. And in terms of the content of the draft, I know in this revision that the idea was to incorporate what Service B says, and so therefore simplify what people have to do. It's the same mechanism that is used with DDR, except that it's not quite the same, because in DNR, Service B is incorporated, but you should not include the address hints. So you have to take them out, because the address hints are listed separately. So I wonder whether that loses the what we were trying to achieve, which is to keep them the same.
Okay, well, I think that goes kind of back to Ben's comment that there's value in holding them both up to align them, and that's just one of the misalignments.
Yeah, and Ben is back to further that.
And Schwartz, I don't view that as a serious misalignment. I think that's a perfectly fine outcome. I also think that we should actually revisit the IP hint recommendations in DDR. So, yeah.
Okay.
The queue is currently empty. If anybody else has a thought that they've been wanted to jump in with, now's the time. Otherwise, we're going to close it in just a couple of seconds and pass it back to Glenn. Okay, thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
Go far.
That worked well, Glenn, so let's do this.
You are next. Let me flip that next presentation up.
So this, do you want to do them in this order? Okay.
Oh, sorry, did I jump the order? Did I grab the wrong slides?
I think so. I pulled up the agenda.
Oh,
right
you're right.
before
My bad. My bad. I'm
Okay.
working off one screen on my laptop. And I can't see the agenda and the
yeah,
at the same time.
Me neither. That's why I printed it. I don't trust all these computers
hang on.
as much as they're great. So split horizon would be awesome.
maybe I misnumbered these things. So this one we're going to do split horizon, right?
Yes.
You know what? I misnumbered the slides when I uploaded them. That's what's going on.
Okay.
There you go.
That's fine. So enterprise split horizon DNS. Next slide, please. So we got some comments from the working group that have been incorporated. Next slide. And a quick recap of what this is doing. So this is similar to what IETF2 has done for a while and got standardized in an RFC. So that there's private only DNS resolvers, and there's public that can potentially have different information in them, resolved to different places. Next slide. So we updated the scope with those changes that this can apply to enterprise ISP, mobile networks, and using the provisioning domains and a key that we're adding to indicate where those resolvers are located. Next slide, please. So one of the changes was clarifying how to do the proof of authority. So there's a couple of steps involved with that. One is the first bullet there is go out and make sure that the private domain is not known to the public DNS. So a query to a public DNS server is necessary to do that. Alternatively, querying a local DNS server where the answer is protected by DNSSEC. The nuance here is just asking locally to a non-DNSSEC and getting back a non-DNSSEC protected answer doesn't tell us if this is really true for the public DNS. And we're trying to prevent that from someone pretending to be Apple.com, Microsoft.com when they're in a when you are visiting a coffee shop or a hotel or something like that. Need to ask a greater authority to find that out. The second bullet is if the RO set matches or is a subdomain of the ADN, we use that to establish a secure connection. If that fails, the network is not authoritative, and we don't use that claim of authority, that claim of ownership of this private domain. Then kind of to handle some of the situations that Barbara was bringing up, the client doesn't need to perform those for some special purpose domains such as home.arpa. I'm thinking we may need to, I don't know how to best, I was talking with some of my authors on this, and we may need to deal with how we have a registry of what these are supposed to be and how to handle this going forward, because we seem to have a, both a IETF sanctioned and then non-sanctioned things like .local that seem to be, might need to be handled in the same way. Next slide, please. And then this is one where I expect to get some comments back. The discovery of the network block policy. So we have two PVD keys, only one of them, the network DNS only, is interesting. The other one is the text that the human is supposed to read that explains why it's DNS only true. So the purpose of this is to allow the network to say, I would really prefer you to only use my DNS servers. The network might do all kinds of interesting and curious blocking. The client might do all sorts of interesting and curious routing around those blockings. But the purpose of this is to provide a shortcut that what the network is trying to do is block things and is trying to keep the user, keep that device to only use those local DNS because it wants to do filtering, because it wants to do whatever it wants to do. It doesn't enforce, it doesn't require that the client honor this. The client can go ahead and ignore this and do whatever it wants. The purpose is to provide information to the user so they can join that network, see this information and decide, oh, this is bad, and this can be done automatically, that they join this network, they see I can only use the local DNS per what this network policy is, and just say, okay, I don't want to use this network, and connect to a different one. Let's drain the queue, because that's really the last slide, and then we have a comments and questions slide after this.
Becker, please.
Dan. Yes, I don't think this is necessarily a bad idea. I guess. So you think that the way I would say, so I guess like in the context of DNR, what I would say is like, here is the thing I want you to use, and then don't use anything else for the two messages I want to send. Is that like basically the concept?
That's basically the idea, yeah.
I mean, I think one thing that I think, I don't know, I think DKG maybe about to jump to the mic, but when I say this, but I mean, I know Vixie had sort of talked about like, I don't know what like the signal would be, but like, like there maybe this is a tri-state, which is like, I really wish you would. I have no opinion. I really wish you would, and if you do, I'll try to block you.
Could be.
I don't know. Maybe that just goes. Maybe that's like maybe you're just getting too fancy. It just goes in the description. And I don't even know if we consume this, but I'm just trying to think about what the useful characteristics are. I mean, like I guess, yeah. So I don't know. Tommy, you might have some thoughts.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Dan, for presenting this. I want to split out the split DNS from the filtering policy part, or like, can you use this another one? So I think the split DNS stuff, I think it makes a lot of sense as it's there. I think we should adopt it and work on that, because I think, to Barbara's earlier point, it's a useful piece of this puzzle and something that local networks often are missing when compared to a VPN, for example. So let's do that. I agree generally with Becker's sentiment on this. Like, it's an interesting area. I would prefer to see it not be in this document, but be split out, because I think there can be more done here. And this is an area that we've been thinking about a lot. And I think there are different scenarios. There's some scenarios where you want to say, like, okay, do not use anything other than me. We need to see everything for policy reasons. And yes, you're right. You can just choose to join the network or not. I think there are other things that we've looked at for putting in a PVD JSON file or a captive JSON file that maybe are like, hey, here's other resolver information you can access maybe in a private way, like what we're doing for Oblivious DO, that still can get the filtering you want, but we don't track your IP. Or maybe here's a safe browsing type server that can make sure it does the right filtering on you. So gotcha. I think we could kind of explore more options in here. I don't even know if that would necessarily be ADD doing it, but it's important and it's good to discuss. So thanks for both parts of these. I just think they're separate.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you, Tommy. Ben?
Yeah, Ben Schwartz. I also think these topics ought to be split. They seem pretty unrelated, and each one of them seems very meaty. I think it's just confusing to have them in the same place.
Okay.
I do have some real concerns here. Fundamentally, there are a lot of people in the world who join networks and who have very little choice in what networks they join. I think we need to be very careful about how we enable networks to impose these kinds of restrictions on users. Those restrictions are going to be used in ways that you don't like if they can be. So I'm really interested in how the scope is restricted to enterprise networks. Is that really such a firm restriction that we can rely on it?
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Andrew, please.
Yeah, I think Split Horizon is really important that it is supported. So we get this in the sort of two parts of the last sort of two sets of comments. So I think the first half of the document is incredibly important. I think specifically for Split Horizon, being able to have this policy expression is important as well. So whether it's included in here or referenced in here, but the details are covered in a separate document, I don't think it matters either way. But I think it's a necessary adjunct to Split Horizon. It either needs to be developed separately and referenced from here, or it has to be in here, absent it being developed somewhere else. So I think both parts are equally important for the split horizon use case. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Well, Glenn, I'm ready for my last one.
Great,
deployment
awesome.
Considerations.
I'll hopefully get the right one this time.
Just so it's explicitly clear, we're moving on from the queue for that.
Dan, you've been on a roll, so here you go. There's the next one.
All right, another short one. Next slide, please. So this is text that was pulled out based on working group comments, pulled out of DNR and into its own spec because it was felt to be better. Next slide. So the current, most of the text is the same. There have been a couple of tune-ups that we've done here, but this is managed and unmanaged home routers. So what we really mean there, and this is in the document, is managed by the ISP versus managed by the home by the consumer, and it covers both fixed and cellular networks as well. So the and legacy CPE are discussed in here, as well as managed and unmanaged DV provisioned certificates for those devices and how to get those. So this is taking us down the steps of how to solve, again, some of the issues that Barbara highlighted in her presentation, but again, splitting this out in a way that we hope will be more applicable to both DDR and DNR. And that's about it. The next slide is there interest in maintaining this? And it feels like it's going to be some informational document with the direction that us authors are currently taking it. And I haven't seen a lot of discussion on this other than, pull it out of our DNR document. If this has a lot of standing power by itself, or if we just need to turn the crank on this. So we need some encouragement to keep doing that, or just a +1 on the mailing list, or here, or whatever. But that's about it, what I have for this document.
So let me jump in as chair and say this. Within the charter of the group, we do in fact have a line item to develop informational documents that cover this kind of territory. So it would fit very well within the charter if we wanted to carry that forward as you suggest.
Okay.
Ben Schwartz, I think this kind of document could be useful, but it seems awfully early to be providing effectively operational guidance for a standard that has not yet been implemented or deployed.
Okay.
I think we'll be much better. We'll do a much better job with this if we have some actual deployment experience to base our recommendations on.
Okay.
Elliot Lear.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Just in response to Ben, that's an argument to not push the document through to a last call, not an argument to avoid to not adopt. And in fact, arguably, it would be sort of cool for this group to have some operational documents like that, where you track deployment as you're developing implementations and getting a little bit of experience, and then just documenting it in what Dan's done or similar.
Okay, cool.
Just double checking. Did you all get that? Elliot, to me, kind of trailed off at the end. Did you feel like you got the whole comment?
Well, it's late at night there.
Yeah.
I'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Alexander, please.
Thank you, Alexander Meyer, today T. I think it's always worthwhile to have a spot where we can actually collect operational experience. So technically, that also means that this draft, if we adopt it, would probably be the last one that we actually finish. And I wouldn't be sure if it would actually become an RFC in the first place then. But I think we do need a spot where we kept operating considerations for future discussions, because it gets easily lost on the mailing list, and that all the things that Barbara talked before could have their spot in a document like this. But it's useful if we have a spot to collect experience. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks. That's all I have.
That's
So
all the queue.
Just to close this from the chair's perspective, what I'm hearing potentially is we might consider giving a adoption call for the group for this document. Is that sort of what I'm picking up? Okay, it's good to know. All right, moving on to our next presenter. We're moving to our last topic, which is number 6, which is Ben, are you or Tommy going to talk to this one, or both of you going to talk to this one?
Mostly me, Ben.
Okay, do you want to drive or do you want me to drive?
Well, I am happy to. I'm happy to do it, but I think you have to.
To have released, so I think you can grab it.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. I can go off and not worry about pushing buttons now.
Okay. Well, forgive me if I click the wrong button at some point.
And time-wise for this one, we've allotted a lot of time. So you have 10 minutes to do your presentation, and we have 15 minutes set aside for discussion. So 25 altogether. I'll go ahead and set a timer for that.
Okay, thanks. So we're back to the first topic. We're talking about this scenario where there's a forwarder between a client and a recursive resolver. The forwarder is just sitting on some private IP address. It doesn't have any other known identity. The recursive resolver it's pointing at actually does support an encrypted transport like DOT. And so we're trying to figure out, can the client get DOT in this scenario? And as Tommy and Barbara have both mentioned, this is actually in our adopted requirements that that the client can learn about this forwarder and presumably upgrade. Otherwise, why do they want this information? So what are we talking about? We are talking about legacy forwarders, forwarders that do not implement any of this stuff. Eric?
So I'm not sure I read that requirement. Can you go back one slide?
Sure.
I don't think I read that text the same way you do. Like, I read that text as doing something the DDR already does, which is saying that if a local encrypted resolver is a forwarder that does not offer encrypted DNS service, then you should send queries to that forwarder that let you learn about the external encrypted DNS service, not that I have to end up talking to the forwarder.
Sure. So there's a way to read DDR that says, yes, we've satisfied these requirements because we've gotten you this information. But DDR says you cannot use this information. You will never. There is no use for this information, and therefore, if you are at all able, you should prevent the client from getting this information because it's useless and will just waste their time. So that's the status quo that we're in. I would say it's not consistent, self-consistent at the moment. Collectively, we are not DDR, and our requirements do not form a self-consistent body of text right now. Okay. Tommy?
I agree with you, and I think we should change the text in DDR to say what Ecker said.
Okay. Let's talk about that in a minute or two. So, just to be clear, we're talking about legacy forwarders, forwarders that have not been updated in any way based on any of the stuff that we're writing here. The other thing we're talking about are reluctant forwarders. So forwarders that are in place for some operational reason, like some people have discussed this issue of needing to be able to bring up DHCP on the local network before the configuration of the public network has totally been figured out. And so you need a forwarder in place so that you can tell the devices on the local network something as soon as the router comes up. But there are routers there that maybe would be happy to be bypassed, even if they're aware of DDR. So out of scope, forwarders that implement DDR, networks that do DNR, but most importantly, in my view, anything with updatable filtering. So age-appropriate content filtering, malware, control domain filtering, whatever you think of doing this stuff in the DNS, it's out of scope here because it can completely disable DDR trivially, and effectively already does. Mozilla has shown that that this is very easy to deploy. So this is the question. Your client, you were told a DNS server address. It's in the private space. You sent a query for this special name, and the server forwarded it to an upstream resolver, which actually has something to say. The forwarder sent it back to the client, so you got this response. What do you do? DDR draft 02 says you can't upgrade. It actually says effectively clients are expected to try to upgrade and then get to certificate validation and fail. And so that doesn't seem ideal. So I've been working on a pull request for DDR that tries to change this behavior. And that's pull request number 11. And what it says is, if the client doesn't have a secure identity for the DNS server, then you can use this information you discovered, but you should only use it for 5 minutes. Okay, that's a little unusual. We don't normally have security requirements that are phrased in this way. Why are we talking about this? So this changes the security posture of the client. In DDR02, when you're in this scenario, the connection remains totally unencrypted. You're vulnerable to a passive attack. And with this change, you're no longer vulnerable to passive monitoring because you can upgrade to the encrypted connection. But one interesting change here is that the vulnerability to active adversaries is very slightly different. So if there is an active adversary on the local network, that adversary can prevent you from doing DDR, so they can continue to monitor your DNS queries. With this change, it's not that the active adversary has to be present right now, it's that the active adversary had to be present the last time you refreshed this. And so that's the reason why the draft recommends refreshing this regularly, so that a transiently present active attacker can't insert themselves into the path and just stick around indefinitely. This also has some implications for network forensics. So the behavior of things like logging forwarders, which actually have to, disable DDR to keep logging, or the kinds of network diagnostics that would be likely to show you an attack. So that's an interesting set of considerations to consider when trying to figure out which of these effectively client behaviors is appropriate. Finally, I'll point out that if you are intentionally forwarding queries and you are aware of DDR, there's not really any difference here. We're not changing anything relevant to that scenario. So my conclusory point here is PR number 11 is essentially what you have to do as a client if you want to get essentially DDR-like auto upgrade in a forwarder scenario. And there are some details that we could certainly tweak, but it's fundamentally a question of what we want, whether we want to include that in scope for the working group or not. And I'll let Tommy give his thoughts on how we ought to proceed.
Ben did a good job walking through the PR. We spoke ahead of time to talk through the trade-offs. As seen on the list, I don't think this PR belongs in DDR, not because the scenario is not worthy of address, but actually because I think it needs to be addressed separately. The trade-offs that Ben just walked us through show that there are trade-offs that aren't just a subset. It's not like one is the more correct answer for all clients. As a result, in DDR, if the validation fails, then at that point, it could be an active attacker that we're connecting to. A client deciding whether to continue to act on that information or not is making a security versus a functionality kind of trade-off, because as Ben said, there's some nuance there. You are adding some security against passive observation. If we keep it in DDR, it doesn't make sense to add more requirements and say, if it fails the upgrade, then you should do this, where you do the waiting period, if the client is unwilling to take that step. Not all clients will. And so if we separate them as two mechanisms where DDR stops there and says, if that doesn't work, DDR ends, you can do mechanism X, follow this draft's guidance, where it can have its own musts and shoulds, because some clients want to do both. Some clients may only want to do the one that may not even be interested in DDR because they're entirely focused on this case. Some will want to always guarantee the identity of the resolver. So I do think this is good work, and Ben has put a lot of work into revving this PR. I just think it deserves its own document space.
Okay, I guess I'll run the queue. Eric Orth.
Yeah, I just want to express strong support for this mechanism. I think it solves one of the most important things for the ADD working group to solve, which is we've previously just informally called this the 85% problem. And I don't really have a strong policy over whether it should be in DDR or should be in its own separate draft. Either way, it should be pretty clear that it is up to the client whether it wants to support just one part of DDR or DDR plus this extra mechanism. And I'm fine with that either way. But yeah, I mean, the reason I'm strongly in support of this, because it solves the important problem, is I think this mechanism does a sufficient job solving the security issue that there would have been this upgrade to the attacker vulnerability had we turned a transient attack into a persistent attack. The repeater request solves that issue. The one thing this doesn't completely solve, that was why I was originally against this proposal, is the user intent scenario. This is essentially everything that Barbara Stark was talking about earlier in this session. The fact that if we bypass the forwarding resolver, we might skip the filtering, anything the user wants out of that forwarding resolver, and the client generally doesn't know if the forwarding resolver was doing something the user wanted or not. I don't think this completely solves that if a client just uses this willy-nilly, but that's a policy matter up for client. And so as long as we make the client aware that the user might want this, then it's up to the client to make good decisions around that. And I can foresee certainly good decisions the client can make around. Maybe the client only uses this information in a configuration UI where the user is specifically saying, yes, I want to do this upgrade, and the client has just used this information to make one of the options there. Or maybe it's a matter of we only do that for a couple of years, and then a couple of years from now, down the line, when all the resolvers have gotten used to this, and most resolvers just have automatic support for filtering out resolver.arpa, and just a few remaining ones can manually go and add a filtering option for that, then it becomes more realistic for clients to then start doing an automatic upgrade, because the ecosystem is adapted and is capable of preventing the user intended behavior from being bypassed. So all around, I think this is a great mechanism. We should be putting it in, and we should be fully supporting it. So either within DDR or its own standalone doc, either way, sounds like a great way to go.
Okay, Tommy Polly.
Yeah. So I think that earlier point about, you don't really know if this is a blind forwarder or it has this special filtering that you added because you put a pie hole on your network or something. Because you don't know that, this is not safe to do automatically, full stop. If you want to do something like this, I think you need to have much more understanding of the nature of the forwarder and the user intent. And until you have that, and until you have some protocol mechanism to do that, so it's not actually a user choice or a policy choice, this cannot be something that we specify, and I don't think this can be part of DDR. So I don't think that's appropriate at all. If you could go back to slide 9. Here, I want to clarify a couple things. First, yeah, on the passive attack, yeah, it's not great to remain unencrypted. I don't think that, there are no ways if we keep pinging every 5 minutes that you can still, you're still going to be downgradable to something that's unencrypted. And I don't think that's the main problem here. I think my huge concern with PR11 is that in the active adversary case, it's a different sort of attack. With DDR, you can downgrade someone. You can get them to talk to the resolver they would have talked to anyway. But with PR11, within a 5-minute period, you can redirect someone to a completely different resolver without user intervention and have no one else be able to tell what's going on. So it's a very different type of hijacking attack that you're opening yourself up to. And it's unclear if it's worth that. Regarding some of the points around frequent lookups, to kind of on that same slide, slide 9, to not have an attack every 5 minutes, I think that would be a good thing to maybe add into the DDR security considerations, to say that you can continue to do lookups periodically if you didn't get a response before, in case someone was intentionally dropping your packets or putting garbage in them. So that's something that's good to do, but that's very different from saying you're going to upgrade to something that you cannot trust. So I strongly think that we need to leave this to option E at the end and essentially let the hint come down. But then other than that, it's going to be a client policy issue until you have much, much more nuanced ways of understanding if your local forwarder is doing some type of filtering or other local policy. And at that point, you've already upgraded your local router, and you may as well solve this in a much better way. So I don't know if you want to.
Thanks, Tommy. I am curious about how you think about the difference in the active attacker, because in DDR, an active attacker can always vacuum up all of your queries indefinitely.
So there are two cases that DDR lets you use automatically, right? One is where you actually have a certificate saying you own this IP address or name. And so in that case, okay, if you've compromised Google's certificate, sure, you can be attacked. In the other case, we're only ever sending it to the address that we already think we're talking to. And so
right.
Yes, I mean that.
But
that
an
can be
active
attacked.
attacker has to have active control of that address in both cases in order to mount the attack. That is the address that the active attacker must control. In PR number 11, the attacker needs to be able to intercept and respond to your query, which is going to that address. So it needs to be able to both read traffic going to that address and write traffic coming from that address. So it owns that. The attacker owns that IP address.
Well, in PR11, they only need to grab they only need to inject one UDP packet to you from that address.
They need to be able to read packets from you in order to synthesize that. So, but yes, they only need to do it once. That is the key difference.
They have a one-time UDP kind of reading and injection attack.
Yes.
Of a packet to then redirect you to an IP address that they control, that now they can have a much easier time for the next 5 minutes.
Yes.
Of just scooping up your traffic. In current DDR, you have to essentially control all TCP communication
well,
to that.
It's still UDP. It's still potentially UDP only.
Well, no. In DDR, if you're trying to get someone to talk dot or do to you, so that no one else can see the lying DNS records you're injecting into the client, you have to kind of continue to control that IP address the entire time if it's a private IP address in DDR.
Yes, you have to. The difference is that you have to maintain continuous control of the IP address versus having control at the moment of discovery. That's the key distinction.
Right, and I think
Okay.
one is a lot harder than the other.
Okay, thank you. Tommy Jensen, sorry, you wanted to jump in?
Yes. Oh, camera button didn't work. So one thing to call out here regarding regarding the DDR vulnerability to passive attack, that assumes that the client, when DDR fails, goes back to plain text DNS, which is a fair assumption because by default that probably is their only option available. However, getting back into that scary area where we say we leave out of scope client policy, and the reason why I think that a separate draft makes sense here is that not all clients may do that. There may be clients that have their own last resort encrypted DNS resolver that they're aware of, that they say that if they can't find a user preferred one, they'll use their own. In that scenario, DDR would actually be the preferred option, because if that fails, they want to stop there and go do their thing. And if PR11 were to be a next step requirement, I'm not saying that it is, but if it were, it would be hard for a client to say, I do DDR up to a certain point, and then I deviate. Whereas if it's a separate mechanism, some clients may say, I try DDR. If that doesn't work, I try PR11. Some clients will say, if DDR doesn't work, I'll fall back to my own thing. Some clients, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand. To generalize, I think we could say that all of these distinctions are entirely within the realm of client behavior.
Yes.
And what we're trying to figure out is what are the consequences of some different client behaviors? Is there a free lunch here with a better client behavior? And what client behaviors are actually out of bounds, that they're effectively undeployable?
Sure. And so, yeah, to what I've said before, I think that PR11 isn't always the better answer to other alternatives, even though it is a good answer. We probably should provide some mechanism for, because it's been made clear that the ecosystem is interested in a signal even if it cannot be authenticated.
Great, thank you. And Glenn, it's back to you.
Well, gosh, that's our agenda.
Look at that.
So bringing up the last little bit here. And I'll need to jump to the page. So this is our planning wrap up. So let me update on a few things that are going on around the group. Some documents are in flux, or in development. So there is a draft that Ben Schwartz submitted earlier and it's in the list of the working group IDs around Service B for the purposes here. Ben is, and Ben, I don't mean to speak for you, but I'm gonna, so correct me where I get it wrong. Ben's going to make an update to Service B. We've been waiting on the Service B document to go through, the main document to go through the process that it was going through. Now that I guess that's done, it's ready for Ben is going to do an update. And Ben, I see you just jumped in the queue, so if you want to speak up. But our intention is ultimately to bring the document that Ben's about to talk about to the group for consideration, because there's dependencies on it, and then bring it forward for a adoption call. So Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, the new draft revision is out as of July 26th. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, sorry. For some reason, I did not get notified by the system. I missed it in my track of email this week, and so thank you for doing that update. So we'll get on that as chairs. The other thing I want to point out is, we've been having some good discussion today. We can continue this discussion on list. We also have these things like the pull request 11 are available as issues within the GitHub. So if you want to make comments there, Taylor and I myself were talking the other day about what to do next and whether we need an interim. So part of our feeling was, if these issues really need like an extended discussion, then potentially we might consider something for after Labor Day in the September timeframe. We haven't definitely said we want to do that yet, but we'll sort of look at the list traffic and the GitHub traffic and sort of try to get a sense in the next week or two once we all recover from 111. If there's activity enough to warrant maybe a couple special issue discussions in a interim in mid-September, but nothing's set as of yet. So if you have opinions on that, drop the note to the chairs and make suggestions on things you want us to tackle. Anyway, that's all I had. Tail or Eric, do you have any comments you'd like to throw in?
No, I'm good. I was going to toss it to Eric as well. So.
And nothing on my side. Thank you for sharing, by the way.
Thank you for AD.
And thank you. This is where we heap the praises on our note takers. Thank you for IETF newcomer Hazel Smith for being a very copious note taker, and to longtime correspondent Tim Wazinski for helping out there too. Thank you both very much.
So, Tommy Jensen, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Or you want us to deal with this off list?
Sure, leading question. I wasn't watching all of the chat. I wasn't sure if there was a clear working group signal on what the future of PR11 should be.
From my perspective, I didn't pick up a clear consensus one way or the other. Tail, do you have a different opinion?
Well, I can see Eric Worth saying that he did think there was a clear consensus. So, yes, so I think that demonstrates that there was not a clear consensus and that we should ask one more time. Tommy Pauly, okay, think it's fine. Separate doc seems reasonable. The chat now seems to be coming to a clear consensus. So
sometimes that all it takes is asking that question. So look, we'll. I'm gonna, as we're running these things, it's sometimes impossible to follow all the pieces. I know I'll go back over and review the comments being made and listen to the recording. I think, and then my co-chair and I, we can chat and we can see what our recommendation to the group will be going forward, whether we do it one way or do it the other way, and whether we do a consensus call on this topic. So stay tuned.
Daniel has going to pop in with a comment. Tommy has asked whether we could do one of the hand raising tool things. Yeah. People want to play with the tech, I guess.
Well, I've never done one of these hand raising tools things, so which button do I press for that?
The show of hands tool. It's the one with the little graph on it, the bar graph.
All right. So what question do we want to ask here, folks? Somebody want to put in the chat?
Should PR11 be pulled to a separate doc? And if you haven't been paying enough attention to know what PR11 is, then.
There is a tool for a HAMA, I think. Yep. So that might be. I think it's always clear when you ask, frankly, the question than relying on the chat or whatever. So I would go either on the mailing list or doing something.
Well, I'm just about to run one of the polls. So, show of hands on should it be pulled to a separate doc. Raise your hand if you do agree that it should be pulled to a separate doc.
And again, just to be sure that what is the meaning if you do not raise your hand? Is it because you have no opinion or you are opposed to it?
Let me be clear then. That's a good point. Thank you, Eric.
In the past, because of this ambiguous signaling we've taken, do not raise is an affirmative rejection of the proposal. If you just don't care, then you don't register an opinion.
Well, what we can do? We can do a back-to-back, whichever. Eric, do you have a recommendation?
Hi, this is Ben Schwartz. I think that as author of PR11, I think that I have a clear signal that this is not going to go into the DDR draft itself. I think the interesting question for the working group is, do we want to attempt to offer some guidance in a new draft for how to address R4.1 and R4.2? That is, how to address the forwarder scenarios.
Okay. I'm just adding that to the notes here, Ben. All right. So I'm going to run the poll, and then we can do raise if you agree, don't raise if you disagree. Okay. And it's open.
The results are coming in pretty quickly. They're in the affirmative, so.
Well, yeah, it's pretty clear. So, well, we have 91 people, so give everyone a chance to vote.
Yeah, okay, well, there's going to be a remarkable turning of the tide, so. So while we're giving it those couple of more seconds for Glenn to be satisfied that enough people have responded, Hazel did mention in the chat that apparently there was a third person taking notes. If you would just please add yourself up in the top of the doc, so we can credit you for also helping out.
And as Jim points out in the chat, this is not a vote. I called it a vote. If I did, I apologize. It's just a raise hand if you agree. We're taking a poll. Good for holding me accountable, Jim.
Arguments about democracy are down the hall to the left.
All right. I think I will call this. And it looks like we have our results. So 29 are saying yes, they do agree. They've raised their hands. One has not raised their hands deliberately. And we have a lot of people who are sort of on the sidelines, not doing anything.
And as usual, it will end up on the list. And so if any objections come up on the list, that's where the final official business of the working group will happen. So,
do we need to, does the tool capture this and store it for us, or do we need to record it separately?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Maybe somebody can throw in the notes. The question, just copy the question down and then.
It turns out you can at least, UI copy the text right out of that screen.
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah.
And dropping the note since I don't have.
Alec Muffet also reports that it did get captured. So.
Oh, okay.
So I think we're good. I think this is where you can all start bailing out a jabber. And thank you very much for attending ADD at IETF 111. We will keep you apprised of the likely chance of an interim in September.
And yeah, thank you for attending. We got done early. Thank you to all the presenters for keeping us on track and for Tail for managing the queue. Take care, everyone.
Bye, all.
What a long way we've come from our initial BOF.
Quite true.
May I?
I'm happy that we've gotten to this point with fewer bloodied knuckles than I imagined seeing.
Me too. Or rather, we get them out professionally on the list, and then here in meeting, we can get to decisions.
We're really quite a congenial group, so.
We
Alec,
are
I don't
now.
know if you join the queue, just jump in and talk, man.
May I please beg a favor? I haven't yet had a chance to test my presentation's screen share, and I was wondering if I could use this opportunity to just check that the software works.
You bet. Just add it to the queue, and
Okay.
I'll
Ask to
approve
share
it.
screen.
I will point out that anything
Yeah.
you post will get recorded and as part of our session. So just make sure it's you want showing.
It's fine.
Right.
Understood. Thank you.
And Hazel, again, thank you very much for your very brave act of stepping up to do that.
Yeah, I was meaning to ask how, I don't know whether you've been looking at them, how were my notes?
I glanced a few times and they were fantastic. So thank you so much.
Okay, I'm glad to have helped.
You almost you may have a career ahead in transcription.
I was just thinking to myself, as my wrists were starting to hurt towards the end, that that if only stenography keyboards were cheaper.
Okay.
Well, actually, RIPE does that, as you may well know, and I am continually amazed by their. Oh, I thought I had approved your screens. There we go again,
thank you.
Alex. Sorry.
That's great. And
But
I did
RIPE
that.
does do the professional stenographer thing, and it's just really a shame that I wish we could do that. It's a tremendous
That
asset.
works.
Because they also provide live transcription up on the screen during like plenaries and so on.
Yeah, that sounds like that would be really good because for people who need captions, live sort of machine generated auto captioning live tends to be pretty rubbish.
Right. No, this is like courtroom reporter stenographer.
Yeah, that's what I mean, as in having actual stenographers doing it rather than you know, throw the audio into an AI and see what text comes out, which is obviously less good.
Yeah, exactly. Alec, are you all set or?
I am all set. Thank you very much for your help.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, guys. I think we're.
Is there a social space I can jump onto to like? Do people hang out anywhere after this thing or not so much?
The gather.town. I don't have the link handy. Glenn, do you have it that you could just?
I don't have it handy. It was
Is
sent out
that
to
the one for the registration desk, or is there a different one?
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's all the same. Yeah, it's one big zone you can jump into.
Okay, cool. I might check that out. Well, this was my first IETF event I've ever taken part in. It was good. I'm glad I was able to do something helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. I don't know, Meet Echo, if you're listening on this, I think you can close our room down. And if you're not, well, we'll just time it out for the next 5 minutes, I guess.
Okay. Well, I'm going to drop. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Bye, Glenn.
You'll take care now.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.